to start somewhere, right? But are you fixing one with the idea of, with the idea that you're fixing only one of many? Or are you fixing one and saying, I fixed one and I'm done and I'm leaving, right? That's the difference. And
Yeah, that's
this
systemic.
one, yeah, this one was, I mean, as you can see, it's a watershed ecological master plan. So it actually addressed the entire watershed, and this was treated as the first lake within the watershed that was restored. Um, so yeah, in that sense, like I think we also really enjoyed uh, being part of something that was more holistic in its thinking, and you know, there is still a, like, the project hasn't ended actually. I mean, it is basically paused at the moment, uh, and paused for lockdown and for lack of funds, but various reasons, but it's paused. We know that at any point, you know, this will be revived.
Should we start and then we'll talk
Yeah,
more about the project?
yeah.
Great. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to our FNC Around the Lake with Vidhya Mohankumar. Friday night conversations are hosted by us at Compartment S4. We are a design collaborative of 8 architects currently functioning out of Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Uttarakhand. Being a young practice, most of our inquiries come from certain amount of experimentation and practice, and discussions that we have amongst ourselves as well as with our mentors and fellow practitioners, realizing that there was a strong gap between the world of academics and practice. We decided to put together these series of conversations called Friday Night Conversations. They used to be at our studio in Ahmedabad before COVID, but now we have moved to this virtual space. So it has been great so far, since we've been able to rope in a lot of practitioners and researchers from different places to talk about topics that we align with and require, and we feel that require a deeper and collective analysis. So since the past few sessions, we have been talking about community design and participation. And we're going to carry that forward in this conversation as well. So for today, we have with us Vidhya Mohankumar. She is an architect and urban designer with 15 years of work experience in India, Ireland, and United States. Her work is focused on creating cities that are people oriented and centered around transit as a part of sustainable development agenda, which she has been passionate about. Her approach is driven by research that is grounded and intersectional as a way to understand the everyday urbanism of cities. In 2011, Vidya founded Urban Design Collective, a collaborative platform for architects, urban designers, and planners to create livable cities through participatory planning. She works with state governments, ULBs, country or town councils, real estate developers, private sector firms, and NGOs. And her urban projects exhibit a wide variety with master plans for cities, towns, station areas, harbors, etc. Today, we will be talking in depth about the Sirusari watershed project by UDC and the different community engagement methods that they employed while working through it. We're also interested in knowing more about the way Vidya works and the varied set of projects that they work on, ranging from art installation to think tank proposals. So now I'm going to give over to you, Vidya. You can start presenting. I'll request everyone to just switch off their videos while the presentation is on, and then we'll switch them all on again so that we can have a more intimate discussion. So yeah, Vidya, you can take over.
Sure. Thanks, Vedanti, Compartment S4. You guys have been very patient and in literally chasing me down for this. I feel like like I'm like half excited and half guilt that this is happening so late. But nevertheless, we get started. So I'm presenting to you all today the Siruseri Watershed Ecological Master Plan project. This was a project that we started working on January 2019, and our engagement was quite short, like very quick actually. Were on the site for about 2 months, and the role we took on for the project was to do a community outreach and engagement strategy. um, so just to sort of like go straight into it, this is what we did first. This is the mission that we defined for ourselves. So the project was actually the red dot that you can see over there in the map is the settlement. It's called Siruseri. It's in the peri-urban area of Chennai. It's the southern end of the city. Um, and you can see that it's surrounded by a cluster of lakes. So this is sort of a typical what you would call an airy cluster. The airy is like the Tamil term for the lake tank water body. So the cluster basically is a cascading series of lakes. So when one overflows, it goes to the next one through a sluice gate, and then from there are additional sort of like spillways that lead on to the agricultural fields. And these were predominantly agricultural settlements, and therefore they were being irrigated through this very ingenious system of the very ingenious area system. So this is the sort of context of this project. Pichandikulam Forest Consultants were brought on board by Tata Consultancy, which were Tata Consultancy is located in this region, in an ITSC that's very adjacent to this settlement. And they brought on PFC, who are environmental scientists, engineers, ecologists, naturalists, a team of like really amazing people. And they were, in charge of the very lake restoration part of it. Now, how did we fit into this? So, I think the first thing that we needed to do was to kind of define our role in this context of the geographical context as well as the context of the project. So we chose our mission, which was to work in collaboration with the community, to listen and seek to understand the character stories, values, and goals, so as to be able to guide the future of Sirseri through a watershed restoration approach. Having defined that this is what we were going to do, we kind of moved on straight ahead into understanding the history of this place. This is a map from 1960. It's one of those declassified US Army maps. And you can see that Sirseri as a settlement featured even right back then, and you can see the area system. It's a beautiful map. If you look closely, the dots are the settlement, and the lines with the blue hatch are the bunds, and it kind of gives you an indication of how water overflows from one to the other, because and the way the bunds are shaped to allow this to happen. The green patches were forest reserves, so you can see that it's sitting in a very beautiful ecological context. Um, we understood from initial conversations with the people that were living there that this lake was a very integral part of their lives. So as I mentioned, irrigation was a key function, but over and above that, it featured very heavily in their daily routines. So whether it was water for drinking or washing, or just relaxing along the banks, along the bunds, or swimming or fishing, or and of course the number of birds that coexisted peacefully with humans in this space. So this is the sort of memory, the collective memory of the lake that we collected through sort of oral history recordings from the settlement. Again, all of this to understand, what it is that we were, working with. This is what it looks like today. This picture over here is the sluice gate, which would have normally indicated the water levels. And when it reaches a particular water level, the gates are opened and it's allowed to overflow to the next adjoining lake in the cluster. And this is what it looks like today. The lake itself, that's the bund that you're seeing here, and just at the sort of bottom of the bund where the settlement starts is like dumping ground for waste. You can see a lot of the cows that are unfortunately eating all of that plastic. And the landscape itself around the lake has sort of degraded in terms of the richness of what it used to be. There was a biodiversity study that was also done. So we had a thorough mapping of the various flora and fauna in the region. And clearly, from comparing with the oral history notes, a lot of these were also disappearing from what we have now and what used to be there earlier. Um, so having established, our role and understanding the context of what it is that we were getting into, we began the sort of, visioning process and the community engagement. Um, we had an 8-step method for this, but mind you, we didn't do the 8 steps and then do them one by one. We didn't plan the 8 steps and then do them one by one on the ground. Each of these 8 steps were very organically, evolved. We I think, the if there was a sort of a central theme to this project, it would be about listening to the people of the village. So we listened, and what came out of it is what evolved into a methodology. uh, so the 8 steps that was really like drawn up right at the very end of the project. Like, we did a retrospective and then said, okay, fine, so this is really what we did these 8 steps in the project. I'm going to go over all of them with you. The first thing was, we wanted to know the demographic, and generally getting an overview of what is the community, what is the makeup of the community that we are going to be working with. This is data from census. Of course, as you all know, it's 2011 and it's pretty outdated, but it gave us a sense of what was the general sort of outlay of who was inhabiting this place. This was one starting point. And then the second thing that we did was, we met the former Panchayat head of the settlement and asked him for what was a sort of, a mental map of the communities and the overall demographic that was inhabiting the settlement. Map you see on the right here is kind of what he drew up. You can see in the picture, we gave him this map of the base map of the settlement, and we asked him if he could point to us what is the broad makeup and whether he would be able to tell us where they are all concentrated. And this is what he drew, which we then translated onto a satellite image. So you can see that his mental map is very caste oriented. It's probably the most obvious reading. Um, Sorry, is there? Um,
Just gonna get it on me. Sorry.
is someone trying to say something?
No, no, continue with that. There's
Okay,
someone
okay.
was unmuted, now muted.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought something for me. All right. Um, so this is what we got from his mapping. We understood that this part here was the core, sort of oldest part, and it kind of like grew northwards, and therefore the mixed group start appearing, like, whereas the original structure was a lot more divided based on caste. So that was one reading that we got. And then the next stage, we moved on to doing household surveys. So we visited as many households as we could. And I think we collected about 250 households of data. And largely asking them about their connections to the lake and trying to understand what their past relationship to it was, how often they visited. We found out that a lot of them hadn't visited the lake in about 3 years' time, even though they live right across from it. They just had no reason to do it. Like we're trying to understand what were the activities that they were performing in and around the lake, and what is, what is the relationship to it now. Um, and we also got a sense of the migrants that were moving into this place. So about almost half population had moved in the last 7 years, and the rest of them were natives. So we kind of were able to identify that half of the population there had a previous connection, and the people that moved in recently, which is in the last 7 years, you know, the lake was just not a part of their lives at all. And so this kind of, it presents itself both as a challenge as well as an opportunity, because you're dealing with half the population that has never had anything to do with this lake, and you're trying to reinforce a connection, and the other half has a severed tie with it. And how do you sort of bring back that lost connection? And that was kind of what we took away from this exercise. um, the next stage was where we were trying to get into some more deeper engagement. We identified local champions, understood the various community networks, and whatever communication channels that existed within this space. So this here is what we call a people connector diagram, and we try to identify who can connect us to who, and what are their sort of relationships, and as a way to reach out to as many people as possible within the settlement. We were doing household services. I said we covered about 250, and I forgot to mention some of the, when I mentioned the migrants, there were there were a lot of gated communities as well. So it was a really, really strange juxtaposition of an old settlement. Some of them had tiled roofs, and some of them had extensions. Some of them had been broken down and pakka houses made. And then somewhere in between, like the fabric, you would also see gated communities, apartment blocks, very alien typology, coexisting with this old settlement pattern that was along this lake. So we were also, and we found it difficult to access the gated communities, which was a challenge, because every time we would try to enter, the security would stop us, and they would be like, you have to meet the resident secretary, and you can't speak to the residents, don't disturb them. We were once told, you can go inside, but don't ring any bells, and don't ask anyone to open their door. It's like, what do we do then? Like, you feel like we're here to talk to people, and if they won't open their door, what are we going to do? But we had an interesting breakthrough. One person, that was Jayashree, she was a resident of one of the gated communities, and she found out about the project, word of mouth, and got very interested to help us. And in fact, she conducted all of the household surveys in the gated community that she was living in. So we were able to absorb some of that sample data thanks to her, who's one of our local champions. Um, so broadly, we were able to, so we had the census data, and then we had the panchayat heads, a mapping of the settlement, and then there was our household surveys, and then we had our local champions and the networks that were there. And this is the sort of makeup that we came up with, that we felt would be relevant to programming what was going to happen in and around the lake, right? So we had power players. We needed to keep these people happy. We needed to keep them, feeling like they are contributing to this project in a way that would reflect back on them as well. There were minorities whose voices needed to be brought forward. And then there were a lot of women players. There were at least some 27 self-help groups that we discovered. So there was a strong network of women players. There were a lot of children, and then there was the gated communities anchored by Jayashree, as I mentioned. Then we had this, group of senior citizens who, were our oral history, what we called our oral history providers. Um, so they would constantly, the natives who would constantly, give us, share with us the traditional knowledge and the traditional practices and how this lake was such an integral part of their lives. So we were, you know, like sort of reliving that lake and the experience that it provided to the settlement through these people. Then there was the youth, there was a very active youth group that was very into playing cricket along the banks of the lake. And they were, their primary concern was whether we were going to take away their ground where they were playing cricket. And then we had the migrants. These were people who had moved in recently, not necessarily into the gated communities, but these were like lower middle class folks that had moved into this neighborhood because land was cheap and affordable and they could buy a tiny parcel and build a house for themselves. So this was the sort of broad makeup of the demographic that we identified that we would then take forward in terms of programming for them. Once we did that, we started gathering stories through focus group discussions. So we targeted each and every one of these groups and conducted focus group discussions with them. So you can see this picture here with women, and then this picture here of us with children. So specifically targeting groups to get their opinions on what this lake could become for themselves. Several of these were conducted in several locations throughout the settlement. And then after we got all of that and we were kind of like saturated with enough information in terms of stories, anecdotes, and all of that, we were like, how do we convert all of that intangible data that we've got? We've basically collected stories. How do we convert stories into data was the next stage. And this is like back to the drawing board here, and this is what we did. And based on each of the groups, the user groups that we had identified, we had also sorted out what we were going to do. Now, what came out of that was stage 6, where we listed out needs, issues, challenges, and opportunities for engagement. Again, all of them reflecting the different user groups that we had identified. Um, 6 broad themes emerged. One was the natural resources and the environment, which is the lake and the forest reserve around it, and the larger ecology and the watershed and the area system and all of that. And the second part was infrastructure itself. They were very lacking in infrastructure, drains, sewage system, mobility infrastructure, and several other sort of basic services were very lacking in a large part of the settlement. Uh, the third theme was activities. A lot of them told us that they had nothing to do, in the evenings. Like when they came back, there was, and this was also tied to the lack of infrastructure. Like, because mobility was such a constraint, they couldn't even access anything that was inside the city for them to get anywhere for any kind of recreational leisure or just any other activities that would help with their holistic development. All of this was missing. Fourth theme that came up was safety. They again, intrinsically tied to lack of infrastructure. There was poor lighting. They felt very unsafe. There was a lot of theft and chain snatching. People felt very unsafe to walk on the streets once it was sundown, and so on. The fifth theme was livelihood opportunities. All of them. So I mentioned to you when we started that this was primarily an agricultural settlement, and um, in the 90s, the government bought out a lot of these agricultural lands to set up an ITSEZ, and TCS, which funded the CSR, which gave the CSR funding for the lake, also situated in this ITSEZ. Um, when the lands were taken, a lot of them were promised employment. Their children were promised employment, but I don't think any of those promises were kept. So they continue to lack livelihood opportunities. Um, the folks who were engaged in farming previously managed to convert some of those skills into horticulture and gardening, and that is what they do in the ITSZ now. And some of them even work in the gated communities as gardeners and so on. The women tend to work mostly as domestic help or housekeeping in the ITSZ. So they're they're sort of very diminished in their role, and what the opportunities that opened up. It was probably the most unfortunate aspect. I mean, apart from the lake system itself being degraded owing to this decline in the agricultural practice around this settlement. Um, is the really sad juxtaposition of the idea, as he said, which is thriving and contributing to the city's GDP, and these people who gave up their lands for that to happen, who are now sort of left in the lurch. Um, the sixth theme was youth involvement. There were no opportunities for the youth to be involved in anything with regard to the settlement. Like, all they were doing was playing cricket, but they were a very enthusiastic bunch who were kind of interested in, properly governance, and again, also their livelihood also is kind of hanging in the air because their access to schools and colleges are very limited. So the exposure levels are very limited. So they're, a demographic that needed something to keep them engaged as well. Um, the opportunities for active engagement was a list of things that came up from conversations with them. Like, people would ask for, would ask for like opportunities on these fronts, and these were farming, gardening, medicinal herb farming, forestry, dairy farming, sculpting, carpentry, and metal fabrication. Essentially, a skill set that was available widely within the settlement, and so they were kind of, they would keep asking for these. But apart from this, also we're very interested in developing additional skills or any other kind of skills development as well that would enable them better livelihood opportunities. Map here shows where the settlement is located, and the distance from the city, and the various amenities that are located, and the access. So they practically had just three bus routes that were servicing this village, and with, like, I think one in the morning and one in the evening, and hardly, sort of being of any use, like real use to anyone for them to, you know, even though they're part of the peri-urban belt, had nothing to do with the city because of this very severed connection. This is a sort of makeup of the settlement itself, which, if you see, has been taken over by so many of these gated communities. This pink part here is the SEZ. This is the settlement. And so many of these gated communities have started scattering themselves here as well, all housing provision for people that are working in this SEZ. You can see that there's a gradual transformation of what this place used to be, because of the SEZ being plonked in the middle. Uh, but there's also some level of resistance, from being urbanized. The distance, or sort of the lack of connection, I think was also contributing to them retaining their character. Maybe, if they were more connected, they might have completely got erased. But they're in an interesting position right now where, there's half the settlement is a native population who, were very fondly reminiscing what it used to be, but again, seeking a very balanced quality of life, which is, somewhere not entirely urbanized but not entirely rural as well, because they've seen what is there on the other side as well. Um, the next stage was consolidating and evaluating needs. So we, arrived at some programmatic requirements as desired by the residents. And so these were sort of like, think of it like a wish list, right? Like, what do they want? And these were like, again, a consolidation from all the various focus group discussions and organizing the data. But I think that the key thing that we decoded here was understanding the level of investment required and the level of maintenance required, and most importantly, what we call the public-private people role ratio. Uh, what does it take in terms of public interest in investment, private interest in investment, and people interest in investment? And when we say investment, it's not just financial investment, but investment in terms of your time and emotional investment as well in the project. So we kind of broke this down as a way, as a way to present it present it back to the residents as well, because our final stage in our engagement strategy was to review and confirm the priorities. So at the end of 2 months of very, very rigorous engagement, we organized this community meeting where we invited, there was this marriage hall in the settlement, which the Panchayat head very generously allowed us to use for this meeting. And we invited all the residents of the village to this meeting. Um, they were, of course, served watermelon because it was really hot at that point of time. And that's the meeting that we had. It wasn't, by accident that most of them turned up who turned up were women. I think they seem to take on a more active role, as we noticed even during the focus group discussions in the goings on in the settlement itself. Um, so we organized this meeting where we summarized our engagement over the previous 2 months and presented to them various desired programs that came from their own needs and aspirations. And we asked them to take a priority vote. So they were each given five sticker dots, and there was a series of several things that could go on along the lake once it was restored. And we asked them to sort of think through and tell us which were the five most important things that they wanted. So this was going on in one side of the hall, and in the other side of the hall, we kept these young people very busy. Um, this was also where we had a sort of a drawing competition where they had to do a visioning exercise for what they would like the lake to become. Um, we had an ulterior motive in organizing this competition because we wanted all the people in the village to attend. And in case anybody said, I have kids to take care of, this meeting was organized on a Sunday. So in case anybody said, because they said that most of them would be available on a Sunday, and on weekdays they're all trying to find work here and there. So we organized a meeting on Sunday, and this competition was organized so they would, be, incentivized to bring their kids along and have them do this on the other side of the hall. These two gentlemen here were part of our oral history user group that we had identified. And we had them in as jury members for this competition. And they picked these two entries as the best vision for what this lake could and should become. At the end of the meeting, all the watermelon that was eaten was fed to the cows, and we left knowing we had organized a zero waste event. Little joys. This is the timeline that for the entire project, from our side at least. So we started in January, and where we made an initial visit, and then February, as you can see, shortest month of the year, but we did most work only in February, where all of this household surveys, focus group discussions, data consolidation, everything, including the community meeting, which was held in the last week of February. And a week from that, we collated everything, finished our analysis, and handed over all of our findings um, um, to PFC to take it forward into the master plan. And this is the lake that we met in 2019 when we started work. And 1 year on, this is what it looks like. The restoration part is complete. Um, these little islands that you see were made, and they were made as inaccessible islands for migratory birds to come and take over. Uh, the flora along the bunds were carefully chosen and planted in a way that it would enable propagation of the biodiversity in and around the lake itself. And this is this is it. We are right now, the lake is restored, and we are looking to continue work here with, furthering the programmatic requirements that were prioritized, and broadly the themes that we are hoping to cash in on to ensure that this lake never goes back to what it became is the education, ecology, and the culture part. Like, you know, um, I think in summary, the key reading was that if you're, you know, accounting for all of these three, uh, the lake can and will survive, and vice versa. Also that it is important to consider all three of these aspects in order to make sure that our water bodies can remain intact. Um, I am done with this.
Okay. Thank you so much, Vidya. It was a pleasure to see the project. I mean, I was really inspired. But yeah, I think one of my obvious questions is that, so I would like just to know further on in terms of the ecology conservation that you managed to do with the lake. How did you go about planning the bunding and things like that? Like, was it done in collaboration with some experts, or was there
Um,
another set of research that was going parallelly?
so we were again not involved in that part. I mean, we knew what was going on, and we were constantly privy to the process of how they were going about the restoration. Um, but for us, we were more sort of learning from what our collaborators were so good at. There was our role was really to, as I said, we defined this for ourselves. And it was the nice thing about working with PFC was that they let us define what we were going to do here, right? Like, so we came in and we were like, okay, these guys are amazing. They know exactly what to do here. We're just going to watch and learn. And this part is something that they don't take up, the part that we did, right? The communication and the outreach strategy, and trying to understand their needs and aspirations and how those could be meaningfully absorbed into the master plan. And so, like, we defined that for ourselves and said we will do this, and we will be this messenger of the voices of Siriseri, and make sure that they're going into the master plan. So that's what we did. We kind of did not tread on each other's toes. Our roles were clearly defined.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we learned quite a bit about how to do this. I mean, not that we're going to go and do this anywhere. I mean, we're not we're not equipped that way, but we understood the
How
sort of
to,
very scientific nature, like the choice of plants that went in along the buns. So like the choice of plants that would prevent erosion of the buns, and so on and so forth. Like, and in general, how would you sort of go about leveling the land? And it was just
right,
fascinating to watch them work.
right, right. So now the project is going to, I mean, which phase would you say the project is in now, and how is it
So
supposed to be?
we're right now in that phase where we are trying to we're seeking funds for the programmatic interventions on the bund and just immediately surrounding the bund, like the outer periphery of the bund. And this is the part that was reflective of what came up from the community engagement. Um, so the connection, and this is the missing link between the people and the lake, and that's where we're at. Like, TCS funded the restoration part alone. We're seeking funds for the other, programmatic requirements from other agencies. That's where we are at now. Again, as I said, taken a backseat because of lockdown, but the program will revolve around these three pivot points, which is ecology, culture, and education.
Right. So you I mean, the master plan is sort of prepared, and you have
Mm.
identified where all the program would be inserted.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's beautiful because it's a watershed master plan. So it actually um, strategizes what's happening in the whole region. Like, so it includes
Mm-hmm.
the forest range, it includes the adjacent areas as well.
Right.
Um, it's not just this, it's like, there's so many phases of this that can unfold going forward. uh, uh, PFC also are also in talks with the forest department, and they've been quite receptive. They've been the forest is like in the if I'm right, at the southern end of the lake. Um, so they're pretty keen on, sort of allowing for like a walking trail which continues from the bund and into the forest trail, like a,
Right.
of course with limited access. Like, we're not going to get like everyone to come in, but they have been quite receptive to the idea of the master plan and their component on the master plan.
Right. So extremely interesting. I'll actually open out for questions if anyone has any questions. We can switch on our videos so that we can see each other. Um, should we, Vidya, can you stop sharing the screen so that like we can look
Oh
at
yes,
each other?
sorry.
No problem. So if anyone has a question, you can just either put it in the chat box or just raise your hand, and there's a raise hand option, and I'll unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. I think we have a,
I do have a question for Vidya.
sure.
Vidya, this is great. This is such a inspiring. I think the visual representation of all the stakeholders involved, and especially the people connector diagram. I think that was a really ingenious idea. Um, my question to you really is: so this Siriseri lake, in that particular sources that I've cited, and even in a lot of other news articles I've read, it seems to be like they're planning that cycling and jogging track or something on the outside of it, and catering to the employees of the IT sector, or catering to the IT parks, right? So your community engagement focused on like the earliest, inhabitants of that neighborhood. So was there
Actually,
any both?
both.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, we did. In fact, I think the report is available on our website, and you'll see that there is a diagram which I think it wasn't there in my presentation, but it's a diagram which actually shows you the difference between what the natives wanted and what the residents of the gated community wanted. But of course, finding middle ground between the two. Like, the folks from the gated communities, obviously, as I said, they were new and they had zero prior connection to the lake, so their needs were very aesthetic. Like, I want a garden, I want a walking path, I want a jogging path, and things like that. Like, I would like to, um, something that just reflects their own lifestyle. but the needs of the native community were more oriented towards their livelihood improvement. So the women particularly were very keen on some kind of skills development. The kids were the most interesting. They wanted like some 3D snake park and I don't know. They came up with the most amazing things that just out of their imagination. But I think a lot of them, and even the adults, were asking for things that would help their kids grow up, into more holistic individuals and have better opportunities when they become adults. So a lot of the priorities were oriented in that direction.
And is this second phase of the programmatic funding also provided by TCS as CSR funds, or is it going to, okay,
No. That's why I said we're seeking funds from other agencies,
other
right?
agency? Okay.
Their interest was primarily the lake, and yeah, so they're. I think they're exhausted. They're finished. Or at least they feel like their role is over. We would, yeah, we are doing this because this is like for us to give back to the community, and also um, not just in terms of like we are these outsiders who came and we want to do this and then we want to give something back to them. Like it's not that kind of a relationship, but it is also in the interest of the lake being sustained. Unless there is an anchor community that is going to be depending on this, or mutually dependent on it, it's not going to survive, right? I mean, I think it, almost all the water bodies that have degraded have the same storyline in our country, that there was a mutual dependence earlier on, and the minute that kind of broke off, it could be something as simple as water supply pipelines coming to your house. You don't need that water from that. There's no direct need to go to that water body and fill up your pot and come back. And if you open a tap, the water comes. That's it. That is the most simplest, form of detachment that happens. Um, so yeah, this storyline is, I think everybody, I don't know where everybody on this call is, or this meetup is from, but I'm sure you would agree that the story is not different in any city here.
Yeah, thanks, Vidya.
Are there any other questions, comments, things you want to discuss? I was actually, if there's not, I was actually curious to as to like how did you come up? So the 8-stage strategy that you put out was, is that a sort of method that you have tested out at other places and thus related? Oh, okay, came specifically for this project.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody asks this question, like not just for this, but for
Yeah.
everything else, whether we have a template. We don't. And that's why I mentioned this earlier as well. The 8 steps was very retrospective. Like when it was framed while writing the final report, that, oh, this is what we did. Like, like, I think the process was just very organic, and it always is. We don't have like a set methodology that can be replicated in another site. um,
Right.
and so much is improvised also, right? Like you've got to it's also differing dynamics with the user groups. It's not just everybody in the settlement or the community, right? Like within that itself, you can see there's granularity in how the larger settlement is made up, and each of them has a different level of influence and interest in the project, in the settlement, in their surroundings, and therefore the engagement has to be altered, like almost like in real time basis.
Right. So it did not even follow like it was. So you did the demography study somewhere later in the timeline, and it wasn't chronological either.
Oh no, it was chronological. The
Okay.
what I presented was in that same order. We did that all
Okay.
in the same order, but Nothing was planned. Like we never knew what we were going to do next when we were doing the previous thing. Like that is what
Ah,
that's
okay.
what I meant.
Okay, okay. That's great. But do you think now, after in retrospect, after doing such an elaborate stage, do you think it can be maybe certain systems can be used or replicated in similar watershed or similar contexts, not only watershed projects? Um,
Um, I think the only thing I would take from this is that last slide which I showed you, the three pivots, and that was like a big takeaway for us also, that you need these three, to take it forward with any water related activity. Um, but beyond that, again, like I said, right, like I wouldn't repeat this method, or I would never start another one thinking that, oh, okay, we're going to go there, I'm going to do this. Like
hmm,
certain things, like for instance, the initial demographic, like pulling up census data and stuff, and doing some household surveys, we would do it, but that is mostly for, like, as, to like basic data collection for us to sort of get a sense of who is it that we are working with, and what is the percentage of women or children, or um, for
right,
instance, I think the percentage of children in a settlement is very important, because they're citizens of tomorrow, so you need to get a sense of how many people are going to grow up and you know ought to feel responsible and proud of their surroundings, and can you therefore um, calibrate your programmatic requirements to an evolving age group. Like these people are gonna this entire percentage is going to grow up and become adults in another 5-10 years, right? So keeping that sort of long term vision in mind when you're planning what you're going to do there. You're not going to put something that is like in 10 years time is going to be like obsolete for like 60% of the population that is there. It's mostly for us to get some sense of an understanding of immediate requirements versus future requirements. but
right.
but that's like some anchor points, right? Like when you start working, we need something to anchor
Sure.
ourselves and our thinking also. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have a question
actually,
from Nishi.
yeah, I have a
Nishi.
question. So actually, I wanted to know that usually when like such lake restoration projects happen, there's a lot of debate around what is going to happen to the land around, like how it is going to be developed. Like usually it gets developed for right now. A lot of land is getting developed as gardens or parks, which are actually now you have to pay to go inside, or it is used for wetlands, or it is used for some other development. So when you say you've developed a programmatic need or you've developed a programmatic interventions, how do you actually make a proposal to implement it? Because then you're also working with a team who is actually restoring the lake part of it, and there'll always be clashes with them, or there'll be clashes with the people who own that land, or how is that the second phase of how do you see that being actually implemented, or what scale do you see it getting implemented?
this part, this land that we're talking about is the commons, right? So it's actually technically owned by everybody. So, which is why it's that much more of a responsibility to ensure that what you put over there actually caters to everybody, like in some way. Um, so I don't think there's a conflict in terms of you know people like related to ownership. Uh, but you're right. There is a tendency for it to become gardens and inaccessible, and and um, and I think, to be honest, if left to TCS, they would do that. Okay.
Yes.
Because they're already like, we restored it, so we will put a fence around it and we will make a jogging track for our employees and it's done. Um, I mean, in fact, I think to be honest, they were not very keen on the engagement part. Um, but we went ahead nevertheless because our collaborators, PFC, were very keen on it, and so we kind of almost did it like an underground operation, the whole thing. Um, so after a point, we did not tell TC that we were doing it. Like we just went ahead and did it. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it was important. We had the comfort of a collaborator that valued the work that we were doing, and felt that it was important for the restoration part, that it was an integral part of the restoration part. It's not just the we come, we fix the lake, and we make the buns and then we go. They also equally felt the need for it to be holistic and involving the people that were originally there and are going to be there for the next 50 years as well. So I think it, I guess if you're asking about conflict and challenge, that was what it was like.
Yeah.
Actually, I also want to ask you. So, what was since there was not like there was actually not a government body involved in the project. Um, how would you see such a process of really understanding uh, the community and the locals and the context so closely, if since you have also done a certain body of work with the government, so it's like a larger question, like how do you see this the participatory research part actually adding or justifying this to a bureaucratic setup or a government body, and what scale do you think it can enter at such kind of projects? Is it at let's say a corporator level, or is it at do you think it can also be incorporated at a larger government body level? So yeah, I want to know more about what you feel about that.
um, Actually, this is an interesting question because when you're addressing scale, you're asking about the like, when you're talking about a lake and it falls within a ward, then it falls within the corporator's jurisdiction, and it may be possible to address this and fix it at a ward level, provided the corporator is showing some interest. And there may be some ward level funds as well that, if he or she is that interested, can get diverted to it. So we unfortunately have not had any local government for the past 5 years. I think since 2016. Yeah, in across the state. So for the past 5 years, it's been directly state and agencies that we've had to deal with. So work like this becomes even more difficult because that whole level of governance is missing, and that level of funding is missing, and that kind of smaller scale of working with the community and the corporator, and being able to facilitate you know grassroots and sort of local government initiative is there's just been no scope for that. um, so in that context, it has been very difficult for bottom up stuff to see any progress within the city areas, because you have to deal with so many different agencies and it just doesn't move. And I say this because we were working on the Buckingham Canal, which flows all through the city, and we had taken up a 3.5 kilometer stretch to restore. And this was a project called Eyes on the Canal, for which we had also organized a national level competition. Uh, GIZ was funding this project, and so we had three winning ideas. They were developed with a holistic vision for, you know, detailed plans for the 3.5 kilometers, but also a vision for the larger, length of the canal that flows through the city area. Uh, hasn't moved an inch. I don't imagine it will move also. And to be honest, we have also like completely dropped, pursuing that. Um, there are like some 5 6 agencies that are involved, with that, with different aspects of the lake. Like the water body itself is owned by, or rather the custodian of the water body is PWD. There is the municipal corporation which deals with the streets that are abutting it. They own those, and they whatever maintain or do not maintain those. uh, and then you have we have an elevated train line that runs all along the canal, and that one is falls under the jurisdiction of Southern Railways. And then you have the Metro Water and Sewerage Board, which is supposed to treat the water, and the water is then uh, poured back into the canal. So they have a sort of, I'm taking all the sewage from different parts of the city, treating it and pouring it in the canal relationship. And then there is the municipal corporation stormwater department that, has their stormwater lines that come and also dump out the stormwater into the canal. Uh, yeah, I guess that's it. So all of these people. Oh, and then, oh, sorry, I forgot. There's also a river restoration trust, which was like we didn't have enough agencies already. There was another agency that was created, whose role was to bring all the other agencies together, but they also function like a separate agency now. So the Chennai River Restoration Trust is another agency which is part of the mix. So I don't think we have the energy for this.
Right. Um, do we have any more? Anyone wants to say something, ask any
Yeah,
question?
so
Monik.
hi Vidya, it was a really nice presentation.
Thank you.
You had shown a diagram which said that what are the amenities you are thinking of giving and what is the funding you are planning to need for each, which you might need for each of the
Oh,
amenity
is
or
that table you're
infrastructure that
talking
you are
about?
adding. Yeah,
It was a table? Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
So I think right now there is a problem of funding to actually get the project going on ground.
Mm.
So has it ever crossed your mind that the people whom you are engaged with, whom you are generating livelihood for, like will they be ready to invest certain amount of money to get their livelihood and their space going? Like something
They
like a crowdfunding.
even if they wanted to, they couldn't.
Okay. Like
They're quite marginalized. I mean, they really couldn't do it. Like,
Essentially, now you'll be looking for funding again in the CSR revenue. That is
yes, and also through some trying to see if some government agency also would take. Like, for instance, as I said, right, the forest department is quite keen on it. So if, like, breaking it into smaller parts, and if
right.
like if, yeah, so
Can
some
distribute.
other yeah, and if that way we could get it moving.
the question I asked, actually it was also because the parks and everything that Nishita was talking about, they mainly get created because there is no maintenance for all the free parks that get created. So 2 3 years down the line, they are not in a state to actually be used the way we had planned earlier. So
Okay.
a funding that comes from the people, it gives a more sense of ownership to the people that this is ours. We have invested certain amount, be it a very little amount.
Understood. Yeah, understood. But I think in this case, they would probably feel more connected if it was, if what you were putting in there was actually feeding into their livelihoods directly. So something that's aesthetic, like a garden, is going to be visually pleasing for them, but it's not going to feed them, right?
Yeah,
So the programmatic requirements again were thought through in a way that, you know, everything we put there is in some way going to give back to them. There is a definite return on investment in, you know, what we're putting. There's absolutely nothing of aesthetic value. Like, so even if it's a garden, it is something which has, like, you know, it's an herb garden, it's a medicinal farming garden, which, you know, again is a source of employment generation. It is not purely aesthetic, but and the gardens featured, landscaping in the gardens featured heavily because of their agrarian background. So they, since they have the sort of, you know, experience working with the soil, they were comfortable with uh, you know, programs that involve that. Except, like how agriculture feeds your stomach, you've got to figure out something that also feeds their stomach when you're proposing um, a green space that is, you know, so that it's not just an aesthetic, like flower garden, or, you know, something that doesn't directly give back to them. So their connect, which earlier also with the lake, was because it was tied to their livelihood. The water from the lake was irrigating their fields, and therefore they had a direct relationship with it. And if we're restoring that tie, it has to be something as direct as that.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Um, just a last question, like a very quick question. So when you are developing these programmatic interventions, so mostly the interventions will be depending also on the water which is there in the lake, right? And so did the lake restoration start restoring the lakes which were then connected like downhill or uphill to that particular lake? Like did it restore the
uh,
which were
the
connecting two lakes?
Okay, that has not been done
Hmm.
yet, because remember I said they have sluice gates which need to,
Hmm.
which you open and connect, right? Those connections have not been restored yet, because again, you, unless we've restored the others also, there's no point in letting the
Yeah.
overflow into those. So right now it is contained within this. Uh, but yeah, I know that PFC is also actively working to seek funding for restoring the other areas in the system as well.
Okay.
I think some partial work has also started in the second one, like the one that directly connects to this big one that has been restored.
Okay.
I think we don't have any more questions or any last questions, comments, suggestions. Okay. Thank you so much, Vidya. It was amazing. I mean, a lot of things to take back. And yeah, in terms of participation and planning and what went into it and the research, it's phenomenal. So it's great having you. Thanks for coming and giving your time. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of the Friday night conversations. You can be in touch with whatever we do next through our social media pages.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks. I mean, I think now is a good time to say that, you know, I mean, um, we've been like following your work as well ever since you published in our last issue of City Observer, and I want to congratulate all of you as well. It's like it's you know, I was talking to Mansi earlier today from Matter, and and we were and we mentioned that, oh, this talk is in the evening, and she was like, oh, I saw that you were talking today, and we were discussing the same thing, that, you know, a very, for a very young practice, like the amount of maturity and sensitivity in your work is really amazing, and I wish you all very well, and I wish you keep up the energy and the momentum to keep going.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vidya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Bye-bye.
Yeah.